Hi everybody, and welcome back to Plastic Models by Regular Dude. Today I'm going to do a little experiment, and it may be over a couple of different days, so my shirt may change during filming. What I'm going to be doing is looking at the new, to me, Mission Models Primer versus Stynylrez Primer. Let's take a look at what's on the bench. Okay, as you can see here, I've got some Stynylrez and I've got the Mission Models Primer. Now, I've already sprayed it, didn't want to bore you with that. Basically what I did is with the Mission Models, I used their formula and I divided it in half because I didn't want to have a junk ton of primer just to paint this flap from a P51. Their recommendation is 30 parts primer, or 30 drops of primer to 6 drops of thinner. So what I did is 15 and 3. And it came out a really nice consistency. Poured in the airbrush, sprayed it. Got some good coverage. I also used their recommendation to make sure that I get nice wet coats, not dry. Wet coats is supposed to aid in adhesion to the plastic. Didn't prep the plastic in any way. I never do. I never wash plastic. I never pre-sand it. None of that kind of stuff. I just paint right on plastic. There's a lot out there that'll say use Psycho, release agents, etc. Well, never had a problem yet. So when I start now, I paint real world. That's what I'm doing here. So as you can see, the sheen on it is kind of an eggshell. Looks really nice. I like that. I don't like it too flat. So that looks really good. Nice coverage. Did a couple of good layers on there. So we'll see how it works. Next, I did gray Stynylrez. Normally I use black, but I've started using gray just because it's better underneath some coats of paint. So this one seems to be a little bit flatter in appearance, but in rubbing my finger on it, it seems about the same. It's got a real smooth texture. Both of them self-leveled really well. I didn't really blow this on real heavy because I just didn't. Tried to follow their instructions. Mission Models, that is. This one here, I blew it on there pretty heavy. One good layer, top and back. And if you've ever worked with Stynylrez primer, it can look really kind of lumpy and pebbly and grody looking. But it self-levels really nice. So again, I'm going into this with no preconceived notions. This I've used before, so I'm just doing my normal thing. This I'm doing according to Mission Models recommendations. So it is about, I sprayed it at about 210 on October 30th. So I will come back at a later, maybe later this evening or tomorrow. Probably tomorrow, because I'm going to let this cure really good. I want to give it at least 12 hours to give it a good fighting chance for the stuff I'm going to do with it. So that's it for now. We'll take a look when I come back to some durability, and we'll start working with some paint. Alright, so I've let these dry overnight, or well, a little more than 24 hours. So let's see. Ain't nothing coming off my fingernail. That very edge did, but just scratching the surface there. I finally got it to scratch a little bit. Let's see how this fares. That one scratched off a little bit easier. But that was just, to take a look. This one being Mission Models, this being Stynylrez. Okay, so now I'm going to mix up a batch of the Mission Models paint, and I'm going to do it without poly first, and then I'll do it with poly. So let me mix some up, and then I'll get it on my airbrush, get it ready to go, and we'll give it a test shot. Okay, so I used using their recommended formula. I ended up doing 10 drops paint, 2 drops thinner, and no poly this time. So I've got it clearly marked poly only, or paint only and paint only. So let us spray that. Okay. And I'm doing it at 12 pounds because they recommend between like 10 and 15 or something like that. So I'm splitting it down the middle. Paint only. It says to do it in light coats. There's that one. Unfortunately, this stuff dries pretty quick because I just stuck my thumb right on it. There's that. Okay, so we're getting some pretty good coverage now. So in a way, this isn't too much different than using Ammo by MIG. You have to spray that on in light coats, but this is a lot thicker. And it seems to dry a bit quicker too. Trying to use up this batch of paint. So let's take a look. So I don't know if you can see on here, but there's no tip dry going on, so that is a good thing. There's a little bit of a coating of paint, but there's no globs or clumps, which is what I've gotten with some other water-based acrylics. And I'm using my HPM2 by Iwata. Okay, that looks like pretty good coverage there. Let's try and use the rest of it on here. Still spraying nice. Now already, I gotta say that I'm really stoked with the fact that it hasn't started drying and coming out in clumps and stuff. That's my biggest complaint with stuff like Vallejo, because by now I'd have to be like shooting it off to this, opening it wide open, my needle, and blowing just some out just to unclog it and just to get it to flow again. Again, there's not really any, man, I'm sorry you can't see this better. See if I can turn it that way. Not really any tip dry going on. Again, just you can faintly see. Guess I should extend the needle, but see, hopefully you can see that. Not really any tip dry. There's a coating of paint on there, but it's staying consistent. It's not clumping up. So that is makes me pretty stoked. It's starting to sound, oh, I'm getting low, so that's why it's starting to sound kind of sputtery. Okay, so there we go. So I'm going to clean this airbrush, and then we'll come back and take a look at the colors, and then I'll mix up some with the poly. Okay, so in this one, I did the same thing. 10 drops paint, 2 drops thinner, and 2 drops of the poly. So we'll see what happens. Now, just in looking at the paint consistency, seems a little smoother in the cup. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but first thing I'm going to do is make sure there's no cleaner left in there because I cleaned it. Okay, so same thing. Now one thing I can notice is it's spraying, seems to be spraying a little bit smoother, and I don't know if it's because it's slightly thinner with the poly additive, but it's a lot, the edges are not quite so overspray and splattery looking. Seems like the atomization is a little bit better. There's that one. Let's take a look and see if there's any tip dry going on. Again, just a little bit of color. There's a... Yep. Now it seems to be staying clear a little bit better on the needle, possibly because of the poly, because from what I gather, the poly is also kind of a, I don't want to say retarder, but yeah, I guess it'd be like a retarder. Slows the drying time down a little bit. Now, I gotta say that I do like the way it sprays with the poly a little bit better than I do without. And that's part of the thing, is it's a complete system. Okay, I'm running out of paint here. So we'll let that dry and see what it looks like after I clean my airbrush. Okay, so here we go. Here are the two things, painted with the poly and painted without the poly. Now, after the color has dried, they look pretty stinking similar, even with a different primer. Now, if a person wanted to really control how it's going to look, they could probably do that by spraying a little bit less opaque layers. But yeah, they look pretty close. The sheen on the two, this one looks slightly more eggshell than this one, but I'm going to let them dry really good before make any final determinations. Then I'll try and experiment with an oil wash and maybe an enamel panel liner, which I never use, just to see how it works and see what happens. I'm also going to do a tape test on both sides of both differently primed pieces and see how that works. But I'm going to let this one dry a really long time as well, because that's generally what I do. I haven't had any tape pull up or paint pull up yet from tape, so I figured it's the best way to do it. So we'll let this dry for a little while and come back. Alrighty then, let's see. So we've got the two pieces here. Let's look at the colors again after it's dried for a little over 24 hours. Color is about the same. The sheen, now after they've cured for a while, This one with the Model Master paint only does look a little flatter, and it feels a little, texture's not too different, but this one does seem to have a bit more of an eggshell look to it. So yeah, visually they look pretty much the same. Even though I sprayed one over gray and one over the red. The coverage is really opaque, I guess that's what I'm saying. So if you wanted to do some, I don't know, pre-shading or a black and white thing like some people do on armor, you'd want to spray it a little bit thinner. But looks good. The color looks good. I like the color of it. It looks like what I would imagine from the stuff I read for late war Dunkelgelb. So that looks pretty good. So now, enough of that. Let's take a look at some masking stuff and see what happens. So let's put, you know, now these are dry. Let me cut these off of the runners here to make them a little easier to handle. Okay, and I also marked these tabs here. Stynylrez paint, and this one is Stynylrez poly. This one here is paint. This side is poly, and that's the one that I've sprayed the Model Master or Mission Models primer on it. So right off the old tape roll, we're gonna put tape there, and there. Then we'll do the same over here. And over here. Okay, so we got the tape on there, and let us see what happens. Okay, so using Mission Models primer on the paint only side. Okay, sehr gut. And good. Now here's something interesting. Can you see where I stuck the paint and where I peeled it off? That is the paint only side, no poly. So that is interesting. So let us try that again. Okay, I'm going to lightly mark right here. There's a delineation right there. I'm going to mark with this pencil. Okay, so we know where it was before. So let's put it on here again. And carefully peel away. That is weird. All right, viewers. Anybody have an idea why that would happen? So, if you were to mask paint only, it's not going to peel it off, but it's going to do some weird coloration thing. That is a trip. So let's try something a little bit different. Let's go at an angle like that. Okay. Now, when I was rubbing that, I was not rubbing over here, so it's not like I'm burnishing one piece and not the other. So, see, look, again, that is really tripping me out. See that? Hope it's showing up on camera there. Yeah, you can see it. That's interesting. Okay, let me do something else here. So this time, whoa, sorry. I'm going to use frog tape, which is a painter's type tape. It's low tack, but I think this actually has a bit more tack than Tamiya, maybe, I don't know. So let's put some of this on here. Peel it off. Still no peeling off, but also no line. So there's something in the adhesive of Tamiya tape that is discoloring or something. That is really interesting. Really interesting. So I'm going to note this down for my final thoughts. So that is interesting. That is interesting. Okay. So on the piece that was primed with Mission Models primer and paint, I did a little scratch test on both the paint only side and the poly side. And as you can see, it's scratched off. See that? Very little effort, really. So I would consider that to be fragile, because if you were to bump that with a tool or you know, anything like that, you could scratch the surface off. Okay. Are there other products that do that? Yes, there is. And you know, that's just an observation on this. It's not a condemnation or anything else, but there it is. So let's take a look at the other piece. All right, so let's do the same things. And I went and washed my hands to make sure they're nice and clean, no oiliness. Primed with Stynel res and painted one side with poly, one side without. So this is the side of paint only, no poly, on Stynel res. Okay, we have the same thing going on with the tape. You can see where the tape was. There's a band there. Almost looks a little bit flatter. But I don't know. That's kind of weird. So there must be something in this Tamiya tape that makes it do that. So let's try the other side. That's the poly side. Again, nothing. No change. So, in fairness, let's try the frog tape on both sides. Let's see how it holds up. Okay, that's the poly side. This is the paint only side. Okay. Again, no delineation. Let's pull it from the same side. And no lifting. Okay. So there's that. That's an interesting observation. All right, so let's see what happens when we try and scratch it. Yep, scratches. Scratches fairly easily, regardless of the... Now this is interesting. This is the paint side only, and it's like... seems to scrape a little bit before it actually peels up. This side, now with the Stynel res primer, it does take a little bit more effort, but it's still, it's coming up. But it does take a little bit more effort. This one's not scratching as easily as the other one. It doesn't seem to be just like popping off in a chunk like on this. So there it is. That's what I've discovered. So let's go over really quick like what I think so far in kind of a little bit of a wrap up on this little, you know, semi-scientific paint test experiment. Okay, as a recap, so in both of these, I sprayed primer first. This side here, I used the Mission Models primer in the red oxide color per their instructions. Then, after it dried 12 hours, I sprayed the paint on using the same instructions that they give on their website. One side I did paint only, one side I did paint with poly. On the side with paint only, whenever I used Tamiya masking tape, it left a pretty visible delineation on the edge where I'd peeled the tape up. So the section where the tape was kind of a different sheen to where the tape wasn't. Tried it 3 times, had the same result each time. On the side with paint only, no poly. Then using frog tape, which is more of a brand you can buy just about anywhere, it did not leave a delineation on the paint. So if you wanted to use Mission Models paint with no poly and you wanted to mask it, I would suggest something other than Tamiya masking tape. I don't know why I did it. All I can think is there's something in the adhesive that does something to the surface of the paint. I don't know. On the poly side, there was no problems with the tape at all. Both sides on the scratch test on the Mission Models primed piece, the paint scratched off fairly easily and in a rather large chunk. Didn't take much, just a little bit of a, and it was a pretty good sized chunk coming off of there. So that was the piece primed with Mission Models primer and painted with their paint. So the one I did Stynylrez Res, I primed with Stynylrez Res. I did the same thing on both sides. Paint only, and then paint with poly. Everything was mixed according to their instructions on the paint, and I just put it over just straight out of the bottle Stynylrez Res primer in gray. Tape had no effect on, there was delineation on the paint only side, just like on this one here, but not on the side that had the poly additive. Again, on the side that there was delineation of the tape, a clear mark left, the frog tape didn't have any effect at all. So again, if you use tape on this stuff, either with the poly or without, you need to make sure you use something other than Tamiya paint or tape. Scratch test, the poly side, no problems with tape at all. Scratch test, it did scratch off, but it took a little bit more effort. You can see here there's a little bit of shininess where my fingernail scraped over it, and it kind of burnished it as I was trying to scrape it off. So it does seem to be a little bit tougher in that respect. So it will damage, but it doesn't seem to be as fragile as the one primed with Mission Models primer. Alright, so that concludes my little experiment here. So what does that tell us? What does it tell me? I don't know what it tells you, but it tells me the following. I won't get into the primer. That's for another video. But as for the paint, here's my thoughts. I really like the colors, or I really like the color of this. I mean, this is only one bottle out of their line that I've tried, but the color seems to be what I would want for a late war German vehicle. It sprays well. either with or without the poly, but I do think it sprays a little bit better with the poly. Part of the reason may be because instead of just putting X amount of drops of the thinner with the paint, you're also putting X amount of poly with the paint. So that may be adding more fluidity to the thick paint. I don't know if I said that right, but it just seemed to flow a little bit better. I like the sheen of the paint when used with the poly. As far as cleaning it, it doesn't really seem to be any harder or any easier than any of, well, I gotta say it is a little bit easier to clean than other brands of water-based acrylics that I've used. Now, if it was a large project like doing, say, a 1/32 scale German aircraft with a lot of camouflage on it and a lot of short bursts and small mottling on the sides of the aircraft, for instance, I'd have to determine that, by actually doing it. But I really don't foresee any problems. There was no tip drag going on. There was no paint buildup on the needle. There was a light film of paint that wasn't as prevalent with the paint mixed with the poly. So the color, the way it sprays, and the sheen is fine, especially with the poly. Cleanup, not as easy as, say, Tamiya paint. Tamiya paint is much easier to clean up because I can use lacquer thinner. But again, I just use strictly their recommendation of using this only. Okay, so what does all this tell me? It tells me this, that in this particular case, the color is really good. I like the color of it. It's what I would imagine, and I'm no expert, but what I've read, what I've seen, this is a good facsimile of late war German armor color. 1944 to 45, Dunkelgelb, RAL 7028. Looks pretty good. It sprays well, especially with the poly. I noticed that a tighter spray pattern was better with the poly than without. So in doing camouflage and any close-in work, I would definitely be using the poly. They're thinner. I mean, apparently it works. I mean, it worked great on what I was doing. It's no more fragile. I would say it's not more or less fragile than other water-based acrylics, with the exception in its paint-only form. With the poly, I would say it's a little bit tougher than some other water-based acrylics. So the one thing that did disturb me, well, I shouldn't say it disturbed me, but it's something for people to watch out for, is in using masking tape. The Tamiya tape did discolor the non-poly paint-only side of both of these pieces. And it was only the Tamiya tape. I used Tamiya and the Frog, as you saw, and the Frog tape didn't do anything at all. So must be something in the adhesive of the Tamiya tape that makes it do that. So my final verdict is this. I won't be replacing my paint lineup of Tamiya specifically yet. This worked well, but I'm not going to say it was better than Tamiya. And I would have to experiment more to really start replacing stuff. So if you're thinking about trying this, I would definitely just go with one bottle, one or two maybe. Try it on something you're not overly concerned about. I mean, to invest in this small amount of product, it wasn't much, and I got it directly from Mission Models. So you know, for a small, if you're interested in trying a water-based acrylic, this might be the way to do it. And it's not too much of an investment for these items here. I mean, you can get away with this. Use whatever primer you have now. Buy these 3 items here. Try it out. If it doesn't work, it's like, I don't want to say that, everybody can just toss it, 10 or 15 bucks or whatever, 20 bucks, whatever it might be. But if you're willing to try it, this would be the way to do it, I would think. And try it first and see if you like it. It's not, from my experiment here, it wasn't enough to get me to change my paint lineup. Tamiya paints so far still behave a lot better for what I do. So I'm going to experiment some more with this stuff. I'm going to, go against their recommendations and try different ratios of thinner and stuff like that and see what I can do with it. But overall, I'd have to say it's good paint, looks good, seems to be as tough or tougher with the poly as any other acrylic water-based acrylic paint. So hopefully all this information gives you some food for thought. I wasn't doing this to persuade or dissuade anybody in their paint choice, merely just to show my own experience on the fly. I didn't practice. I did spray some stuff, but I didn't really spend too much time really digging into it. That's what this was, right off the cuff, just to see in an honest light how the stuff works. And it works about like I thought it would, maybe a little bit less than I thought it would. Maybe I was expecting a little bit more, but again, I have to work with this stuff a little bit, to kind of figure out what's going on. As far as having to mix, thinner and poly into the, with paint, all that kind of, I don't mind that at all. I mean, good grief, with, Vallejo paints and stuff like that, you got to use flow improvers and retarders and all that kind of stuff to get it to, halfway work, at least for me and for a lot of other people, it seems. So the mixing of it's no big deal. I don't find that to be a detriment. You have to do that with any paint. I mean, you have to add paint or add thinner or reduce thinner depending on what consistency of paint you want and everything else. So it's no big deal. As far as having to use this as your cleaner, I don't really find that a detriment, because there are a lot of people that are really good about using brand specific things. Like if using Vallejo paint, use Vallejo primer, use the Vallejo cleaner, because they're all made to work with each other. So in this case, the cleaner and the thinner is in one bottle. So if that's a big thing, buy 2 bottles. Mark one thinner, mark one cleaner. It's just like if you're using Vallejo thinner and cleaner. Now, the drawback is that you can't just, apparently, and I'm going to experiment with this more, you can't just use any cleaner to clean the stuff out of your airbrush, because you could potentially contaminate your next batch of paint you spray. So that's all stuff I'll have to work with. So hopefully all this has been kind of informative, gives you some food for thought. Again, I'm not trying to persuade or dissuade. I'm merely showing my experience initially using these paints. So I think I'll do another one on primer at some later point, comparing the Mission Model primer to my favorite primer currently, which is Stynel Res, but that'll be another day. So anyway, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, hints, tips, etc., please put them in the comments below, and I'll get back to you as quick as I can. And thanks for watching Plastic Models by a Regular Dude, and I will see you all later.